Hey, yo, everybody. This is another installment of Finding Sensibility, where we take positive or inspirational quotes, see if we can make them work in our day-to-day, or if they might just be a product of the times. Today stumped me for quite a while. It is probably a good example of me overthinking something. However, this is a time when the context of the person making the quote felt really important to me to include. So we're going to spend a little bit of time with that, and I'm going to try to find a way to make this positive. So our quote comes from a philosopher named Arthur Schopenhauer. And before we get into his quote, I'm going to read a little bit about his philosophy. He was a bit of a pessimist when it came to our existence, our place in the world, etc., etc. And so I am, like I said, going to read a little bit about his philosophy and then try to use that to give his quote a little bit of context. We'll see how it goes. Schopenhauer's big idea was asserting your will. And in this case, will is more of a universal term rather than an individual term. The absolute principle of the world for Schopenhauer is will. In lower life forms, it's simply the blind will of self-preservation. Will is everywhere, and everything is guided by it. So this is not just a human construct, this is in intangible or inanimate objects as well. Will is the will to live, the will to be, and thus the cause of all suffering in the world. For Schopenhauer, the will in man makes him intriguing, selfish, and grasping. The paradox of existence is that the essential principle is the will to live, which is absolutely defeated in death. If life is essentially base and selfish, a moral act will be one that is based not on some strange principle or some abstract idea of justice. It will be committed out of sympathy. A moral act is always unselfish. I'm going to try to briefly make a little bit of sense out of that. So, what this idea of will is, in its basest form, is to exist. Not to live, to exist. However, no matter what you do, existence will be snuffed out by death. So, in a sense, nothing we do matters because we're all going to die someday. Is a bit of the crux of his philosophy. But when he's talking about the unselfish act, it doesn't have anything to do with justice. It's more we do good things for people, or we help each other out, or we try to do good, not because of the ideals that these actions represent, but it's more so we don't feel bad for not doing it. Which isn't a bad way to operate. The good things you do still get done. It becomes a massive gray area. So ultimately, he was a bit of a pessimist when it came to our existence and our place in the world. So, our quote for today: every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. I'm going to try to keep this simple and brief because it's going to be way too easy to just get completely out of control with it. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. So my initial thought when looking at this is the feeling of surprise or jealousy or envy. This is envy. That we feel when we see somebody succeed so much easier than us, or so much more voluminous than us. If I can't make $1 million a year, how in the world does anybody make $1 million a year? Let alone $100 million a year, $500 million a year. That's where my mind initially goes with this. Where if I have these limitations and these restrictions and these barriers, how is it that not every single person in the world has the same ones? How do they overcome it when I haven't or I can't? So that's kind of one component of it. The other has a little bit more to do with the struggle for empathy. And every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. The ability to empathize with somebody is ultimately difficult to do because it forces you to experience a lot of their pains or their downfalls, when it's easier to just empathize when they're feeling good. And this kind of, I feel like this is me overthinking it a little bit, but in light of recent events that have happened kind of in the public eye, I think this is also where we feel the need to isolate ourselves when we struggle. That when we have hardships and when we're going through tough times, it's best to block ourselves off and keep it to ourselves and basically put blinders on, so that the only thing I'm dealing with is this problem and getting to the other side of it, and the world kind of vanishes. Like I said, I feel like I might be grasping at straws with that, but I still feel very strongly about it. I feel that even though it may be reaching a little bit, it doesn't make it not true. This ultimately doesn't feel like a positive idea or a positive quote, but I've got a story that I hope will make it hopeful, maybe not positive, but at least not depressing. It was a few years ago, and I was out in the woods, out in the country, so the sky was so bright, so full of stars, there weren't any city lights around. I was able to see so far into the night sky. And I was reminded of a picture from the Hubble telescope, one of the first big, clear images we had of the universe around us, and realizing how big it actually was. And so I was looking up at the sky and trying to comprehend how big the universe actually is. And as I was doing that, I had the realization that no matter how great I try to be, my existence and my actions are not going to impact the universe at all. And for a moment that was really depressing. It was really discouraging to just kind of feel so small and insignificant. But a moment later, I had more of a feeling of inspiration and peace. Because if my actions don't change the landscape of existence in any major way, then there's not this impending duty to do that. I have the freedom to pursue what makes me happy, what fulfills me as I am. And that was an extremely freeing moment, to realize that my insignificance actually gives me the freedom to pursue the things I love. And so I have. It doesn't mean it's easy. Still had to give up a lot of things to do that. And I continue to have to give up a lot of things to continue to do what I do. And I'm not always happy. But the important thing is that I am no longer lost. And it's because of my insignificance. It's because in the grand scheme of things, I don't matter. My life doesn't matter. My actions don't matter. The universe is so big that I have no right to think what I do matters. So because of that, I'm completely free to do the things I love. If you can accept your insignificance, and if you can recognize that as you take the limits of your own field of vision and recognize that it's not the world's limit, you can then become limitless in what you do and how you do it. And it takes a lot of courage to pull that trigger. But after the first time you pull it, it becomes much easier. Still scary sometimes, but you're able to do it. I promise you, you can do it. This was a long one today, and I had a lot of things to talk about. Hopefully the rest will never be quite this long. But this was an important topic to me today, and so I'm gonna kind of bite it and accept that probably a lot of people won't stick around for this whole time. But if you do, I really hope you got something out of this, and recognize when you need the help to do what you need to do, even if it's just to make it to the end of the day. Until next time, stay tuned and stay very, very real.